Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the hacking scene or the homebrew scene around the Switch. Now, the homebrew scene has been through a lot, obviously, as they continue to hack and then add new features to the Switch that Nintendo still has not added, right? They have themes, they have local backups. I mean, the list goes on for everything that they pretty much have that is still not with the Switch. Well, we're coming up on the 2-year anniversary of the system in about a month now, right? Yeah, a little less than a month. So that's coming up. And now we could find out a bit more about what the Switch is actually capable of. And when I say capable of, I mean like what it can do if restrictions are not in place. Now, during development, Nintendo and Nvidia decided to customize the Switch in a number of ways. Of course, they added an extra gigabyte of RAM, so it was 4 gigabytes of RAM. And then they also played around with the clock speeds on the Switch. They have 2 different clock speeds that we know of. There's also apparently a third one that developers have access to that Digital Foundry talked about at one point. But we do know that there is, of course, a clock speed for handheld mode and a clock speed for docked play. The CPU stays the same. It's the GPU that scales back and forth. So it'll lower its frequency when you're on the go and you're playing in handheld mode, and it will then raise the frequency when you're plugged into a TV because there is no battery bottleneck anymore. It just runs off the wall. That's why sometimes you get better performance in docked mode as opposed to handheld mode, and sometimes because the resolution just seems to work out better with any game, you might actually get better performance in handheld mode. Just because, like when Zelda launched, it actually had better performance in handheld mode. I know they've been working on patches and it runs better now, but when it first came out, it ran better in handheld mode, and that probably has a lot to do with the resolution and the way the GPU scaled. But that's why you get different performances in different modes, and now we're going to see some overclocking take place, and there's going to be some comparisons that are going to be drawn, and it could give us just a little peek at what Nintendo could do with a Switch Pro, if you'd like to say that. Here's the thing, though. I don't think Nintendo is going to jump at the Switch Pro first. I think that's further down their list of priorities. I think they need to get something out for the lower end market. What I mean by that is the 3DS is going away, as we're seeing in sales and everything. It's trending downwards. They need something on the bottom end of the spectrum. They need something $200 or less for it to make sense and kind of fill in the gap at like kind of the cheaper price point. I think a Pro version would come eventually, but I think it will come after the Mini or the smaller one, the Lite, whatever you want to call it. But we're going to see people now take the GPU and kind of mess with the frequency and overclock it in a sense. We'll see it apparently, I believe, in docked mode, and we'll also see it primarily for people who are talking about in handheld mode, as people have already had success actually overclocking it in handheld mode, and they've actually shown some results. Now, this program for Homebrew is called Freebird, and you may have actually seen it making the rounds today, as several sites started reporting on it, whether it was Go Nintendo or Nintendo Soup. Probably Nintendo Everything. Basically, everyone who takes a look at these kind of things reported it, mostly because it can have an effect on the system itself. So they even put a little screenshot here that it kind of shows us what it would look like when you're running it on the system that's modded and hacked. And you can see that they kind of have the different frequencies set up there. They have the GPU for 307 going to 768. The CPU doesn't move. The GPU is the one that they're moving. The CPU has been overclocked by people already. But the thing about that is games do weird things with a different frequency on the CPU, mostly because the CPU is responsible for essentially running the show pretty much, whether it's like AI or drawing calls to different parts of the system or storing stuff in memory. And if you start playing around with that frequency, it seems to do some weird things in games. So they're still playing around with that. The reason that they have overclocked the CPU more or less has to do with running emulators and ROMs on the system, because they will leverage that in different emulators and it just runs better, whether it's full speed or whatnot. So you're seeing a couple of different frequencies. 768 is what it tends to run at when it's docked, and I'll be curious to see if people push that up. And then 307 tends to be what it is at the bottom end for like handheld mode, for example. And then you see the RAM and others. So they do at least have all this pointed out. The higher ones, you actually have to have it plugged in, so it won't work on handheld mode for that, probably due to heat and of course battery draw, and who knows what other consequences could happen there. Now, we have tested it here on the channel with thermals, and I found that the thermals on the Switch actually had some headroom, as in there was room before the system shuts itself down that you could play with for heat. And in fact, some have actually managed to already overclock it in handheld mode, like Crow here on Twitter. And you're seeing a video here that they actually ran it with Pokemon Let's Go, and it runs better at 460 megahertz rather than 307. So stock compared to, of course, overclocked. Mostly in Viridian Forest, as that seems to be an issue for the system. When it's running around in there, it'll chug, the frames will drop. And that's pretty much the main issue here. People are trying to get better performance out of the Switch, whether it's in handheld mode, maybe dock mode, we'll see, because we do know the X1 can go up to 1 gigahertz, and it's currently sitting at 760 megahertz. So there is some room there to push it if they can. And that's going to be the curious thing, is if they can do it. I would like to see them do it, because if you have games like this one here, Xenoblade Chronicles 2, when it is in handheld mode, this is a screenshot, for example, from it. It looks rough, right? It's a better game in dock mode by far. And we've seen it. You can go look at the Digital Foundry comparisons. It drops low, and the frame rate and the resolution drop pretty badly. So if you're overclocking it, dynamic resolution, for example, would tend to sit on the higher end rather than drop super low. Frame rate, we assume, would be better. And that, at least so far, seems to be the case for tests that have been made. This is the game that I like. If there's ever a Switch Pro and there is improvements made in any one game, this is the one that I would love to see them improve, because if this game would run at a higher resolution, it would be way better looking. Seriously, it would look amazing with the art style and everything they went with. You can still get away with it because they were smart and, of course, made the text pretty much always like shown at a higher resolution, so that looks sharper. It's just everything else, especially in handheld mode when you're running around the world, will look pretty bad, and that's something we've talked about a lot and gone over. So that's one. I guess Doom is another good test subject. Basically anything with a scaling resolution. I guess Mario Odyssey would probably sit at the higher end with a locked frame rate. It's already locked now, so I guess it's not really that big of a deal. But Doom, Wolfenstein, third-party games. I saw, I think Crow also tested, here we go, Lego City Undercover using the overclocked. So it does have benefits in several games at this point, and now it's available to pretty much everyone. So we're going to see some tests. I have a feeling Modern Vintage Gamer will look at it as he actually overclocked the CPU to see what he could do there, and had a whole video on that. Pretty interesting stuff, but it mostly had to do with emulators. So if he gets a chance to overclock the GPU and play around with it, I would be curious to see how a lot of games that would run at a low resolution, or of course frame rate, or struggle in different points, how it would react to that overclock, and if it does help enough for it to matter. As far as I can tell, people have overclocked it to over 400 megahertz so far, like Crow. Haven't had issues with battery. So the battery hasn't gotten really bad in terms of battery length or life. So we'll see if anything happens there. Of course, if there is a Pro version, they'll improve on other things. For example, if they go up to the with the X2, I guess everyone calls it, the Parker chip, they would automatically get twice memory bandwidth, for example, and you can't improve that through overclocking. You got to upgrade the chip, and that's probably what would happen if they went to that point, which would, of course, help a lot at that bottleneck. So they're not going to get the exact Pro results that we assume would happen if there was a Pro, but it's still a nice little look to see what higher clock speeds can do for us in some of these games. Let me know what you guys think about this situation with the Switch now having GPU overclocking ability pretty much released to the public. Anyone can go do it now if you have a modded Switch, and it's harder to get those now because Nintendo and Nvidia pretty much patched that out with a, well, not really patched, but put out a new hardware revision that makes it impossible to do, at least for now. But let me know what you guys think about this down below. If there's any games you would like to see get some performance improvements that you've been playing and you're like, it'd be cool if this ran a bit better, or looked a little bit better with a better resolution, let me know down below, guys. Make sure you like the video if you liked it, dislike if not. Guys, I'll see you in the next video.